Start recording, start recording. Hi, I have the cure for autism. It seems like one of those sentences that autistic people have probably heard way too many times from people who have never bothered to even try to understand autistic people in the first place. Because it's usually when people say that they have or they want a cure for autism, what they're really saying is, how do we make autistic people easier for us non-autistic people to deal with? How do we make them quieter? How do we make them less intense, less inconvenient, less different? You see, that's not care. That's control. So because autism is not some kind of stain that needs to be scrubbed out of a human being, let's talk about it for what it is. Autism is a different neurotype, a different way of processing, a different way of sensing, a different way of communicating. A different way of communicating. A different way of existing in a world that is just not built with anybody with these type of conditions in mind. And this is where I want to flip the conversation, because the real question is not how do we cure autistic people, but rather the question should be, what would autistic people actually have if the world accommodated them? Because we have a lot of what people would call autistic symptoms that are actually things that are happening when somebody is forced to survive in an environment that it keeps overwhelming them, confusing them, shaming them, or even punishing them for being different. So let's talk about what autistic people would have in a world that was actually built for them. Well, they would have a lot less burnout. They would not have to spend every single day forcing eye contact like I'm trying to force eye contact with this camera, translating themselves into some kind of acceptable language, rehearsing conversations in their head, pretending sound does not hurt them, pretending lights don't bother them, pretending not to be overwhelmed when all this stuff is going on at all times, and just basically pretending that they're fine until they completely collapse. They would have a lot less masking because they wouldn't have to constantly perform this version of themselves that feels more comfortable for everybody else. They would have a lot less anxiety caused by unpredictability because they would have clear expectations, direct communication, fewer invisible social rules that everybody assumes they should somehow magically understand. They would have fewer meltdowns and shutdowns, not because they were fixed, but because distress would be taken seriously a lot sooner. Before the breaking point, before that overload becomes a crisis, they would have more energy then. They would have energy for relationships, for creativity, for work, for joy, for life. They would have energy to be themselves instead of using every ounce of strength just to survive the day. We would have a lot more dignity then, because we would not be treated like some problem to manage. We would be treated like a person to understand. So what would it actually look like? An autistic-friendly world with clear communication? Well, there would be no hints. There would be no guessing games. There would be no, you should have just known what I meant, lines thrown at us that just lead to punishment. It would be direct instructions. It would mean that people would be allowed to ask clarifying questions without being judged for it. It would mean extra processing time, being respected by others. It would mean that you're not treating a lack of eye contact as a form of dishonesty, disrespect, or lack of care. It's hard to make eye contact, and to not do everything perfect is exhausting, and it's dehumanizing. Because I think a lot of what people keep missing is a lot of suffering does not come from autism itself. A lot of suffering comes from being unsupported, misunderstood, overstimulated, bullied, punished, forced to mask, forced to translate ourselves constantly, forced to survive in systems that were never built with us in mind. So no, I don't have a cure for autism in the way that some people mean it. And nobody should even want a cure in that way. We don't want autistic people to be erased. We don't want them to be stripped down until all that is left is nothing more than somebody that is comfortable for everybody else. No, but I do think I know what would change lives. Accommodation, understanding, safety, predictability, care. If you really want to change the experience of autism for so many people, you do not start by removing the autistic person from themselves. You start by removing all the unnecessary suffering first. You start by changing the environment. You start by changing expectations. You start by changing the way people respond. You see, the cure for autism is to take you out of the equation and give them an A for accommodations. So you could say the cure for autism, I'm grabbing the wrong graphic, is actually the care for autism. Poof. You see, when you put accommodations where you think the cure is, you get care. And honestly, a lot more people could use that, whether they're neurodivergent or not, autistic or not, ADHD or not. We need care, not a cure.